today's a fabulous opportunity, at least from my perspective. I'm Dr. Robert Lampard, and I've been fortunate to have been born in Red Deer the day after my mother arrived. But that's only part of the story, because I have an identical twin brother, and the truth is he kicked me out, so I'm one of a set of twins. But it does take me back in Red Deer's history quite some time to be able to say that Red Deer has a very short history. And as I've said to a number of my friends, if it doesn't grab that as it passes through, it'll lose it too. So to start today, we have one of Red Deer's remarkable citizens, Jerry Tenant, to tell us a bit about why he came to Red Deer, because almost everybody has, and what he's done in Red Deer, and some of the highlights of his life and time in Red Deer, which goes back a long way, and certainly from looking at the community from an individual point of view, and some of the things that we've been able to achieve in that short history of ours. Jerry has been a very significant part of it. So Jerry, would you like to tell us a bit about what brought you here, and particularly some of your family highlights, which I found quite intriguing?
Thank you, Dr. Bob. My connection to Red Deer goes back probably to the late 40s after the Second World War, when my grandparents and an aunt and uncle moved here. I moved here basically in 1960, straight out of high school. I was born and raised in Stettler. My family immigrated, my dad's family immigrated to that area in East Central Alberta in 1904. He was 6 months old. For some reason, my grandfather, who had one eye and one hand, decided to leave England and come and eke out a living in East Central Alberta as a farmer with 5 children, 2 more after they arrived. So they had a tough life, but they made it through. And I was born in Stettler in 1942, just during the war, and grew up and took all my high schooling there. My mother's family immigrated from the States in the 1920s, when my grandfather on that side and his brother went out to the same area in East Central Alberta and ran threshing crews, and then stayed in that area up until the time that my grandfather and my uncle both joined the Calgary tanks in the Second World War. My grandfather lied about his age, got in. He'd owned restaurants, so they sent him as a cook up to London. Just off, quite an interesting story. He wanted to get in on the action, so he tried to sneak onto a landing craft for the Dieppe raid, but got caught and was sent back up to London as a cook. So my family has a long history in the Central Alberta area, and I came to Red Deer in 1960 after graduating high school, and although I'd visited here on a number of occasions and to visit relatives, but I'd always had an interest in radio. Television wasn't a big thing back then, but when I was in high school, we did a program on the radio station in Drumheller, CJDV, and I was one of those chosen from the high school to go, and I read the news. And the news, of course, was about Stettler High School and what was happening in Stettler. And so I got the bug. So I decided I wanted to be in radio, and my uncle in Red Deer had a connection. He worked for AGT, and he had a connection with the people at the radio station here, CKRD. So I came over on the bus, and the first thing I did was went to the unemployment office, and because back then they found you jobs, and they said, "Oh, we can put you in a bank right away. We can get you a job in the Bank of Nova Scotia." And I said, "No, I want to be in radio." So I found my way to the radio station, met one of the fellows there who interviewed me, and they didn't have any jobs, but I said, "Can I use you as a reference?" So I sent letters out to different radio stations, and a few days later I got a call, and he said, "A friend of mine just came through. He's with CFSL Radio in Weyburn, Saskatchewan, and he's looking for a continuity writer," which is a commercial writer. That had been one of my strong points in school, so long story short, I ended up in Weyburn, Saskatchewan for 3 months Then I came back to Red Deer and worked for CKRD radio and television for 21 years.
Oh, you're just listening to you. I'm amazed our paths didn't cross before they finally did, but some of your stories remind me of how difficult early farming was in Alberta. My father left the bank and went farming just south of Stettler, and unfortunately was killed in a farming accident. So my grandfather is born in Stettler too. Your comments about the Calgary tanks, yes, they're named Calgary, but a lot of them were from around Red Deer, and that was because the hiring criteria for them was you had to have worked with big machinery, and anybody who worked on a farm was deemed to have worked with big machinery. And of course, it was the Calgary tanks that ended up on the Dieppe raid, and we could tell many side stories about that. But there is one I think you mentioned briefly to me about your wife. I'm sorry, not your wife, your mother, and how she ended up coming to Red Deer, and how you ended up as part of the family. And maybe you tell us a bit about her and that unusual episode.
Well, my mother's family, as I said, came from the States. As a family, we were really involved in Stettler, in the community, and that's sort of where I've got my, I guess, the decision to get involved in community activities. My mother was involved in church activities. My dad was in the community band. My brother and I were in scouting. We were involved in sports in Stettler, and so the move to Red Deer, because we had family here, was something that was easy to do. I stayed with my aunt and uncle. One of the funny stories, I guess, when I got here wasn't about my mother, but I was involved in scouting in Stettler for many years, and I was what was called when I was in Scouts, a cub instructor. So I worked with cubs. My uncle was a scout cub master here in Red Deer at Knox Presbyterian Church. And when I arrived from Weyburn, Saskatchewan, eventually got here by bus, he met me at the bus at 6 o'clock on a Monday night and said, "Guess where you're going tonight?" 7 o'clock, I was down at Knox Church as an assistant cub leader, and I stayed there ever since. So that's how I kept my involvement going in the scouting movement. But my mom was a very intelligent woman. She went to normal school. She went to a couple of business schools. My dad was a carpenter. He worked hard and provided for the family. But Mom was sort of the mainstay in the family, and kept things going while Dad provided the income.
I think you mentioned that one of them was a war bride, or one of your.
That was my wife's family. My wife's family came to Red Deer in the 1920s. Her dad finished his high school here at Lindsay Thurber in about 1934, I think it was. And joined the Army in 1939, and he was in the Second World War as well for 6 years. He was with the artillery out of Edmonton and saw action in Sicily and Italy and Europe. And he met my wife's mother in England, and they married, and so she was a war bride. And my wife tells me she remembers stories of hiding under the stairs when the bombs were dropping. She was about 3 years old. And she's always been a little claustrophobic in small places, and she wondered why. And she found that's why they hid under the stairs as the bombs were dropping. And then they got to Canada, came across in the Queen Mary, and landed in Halifax at, I think it was Pier 13 or whatever it was, and made their way by train across here and farmed in what is now the Glendale area, and till they sold the farm to my wife's great uncle, and then her dad took jobs in other areas in the city. So she's been here longer than I have. She's been here since 1946.
Yes, there are quite a number of war brides that came back to Red Deer. I certainly remember our camp supervisor at Camp Woods. She was a war bride, Mary Ellen Wood, and we'll talk a bit more about scouting later.
Yes.
But, there are a lot of connections because of the war, and I think of my own parents and how the war so dramatically affected them. But Jerry, tell us a bit about some of the highlights of your time with CKRD and then with the TV station that followed.
Yeah, as I said, for some reason I thought radio would be a big career, even though my uncle tried to dissuade me because he didn't think there was much of a future in it for anyone. But I was determined, and so I joined CKRD as a writer in 1960. And then shortly after that, the Purnell family owned the station at the time. Shortly after that, they sold that to Henry Flock and Gordon Spackman, and they then bought the TV station that was out on East Hill and moved it into the city. And so we had a combination of CKRD radio and television. Of course, that time CKRD was the only station in Red Deer. There were only about 3 in central Alberta. I think Drumheller, Wetaskiwin, Drumheller Camrose in Red Deer. Now there's 7 or 8. I think 5 in Red Deer and probably up to 10 in the area. And of course, the TV station was out in the East Hill until they moved it into town. So over my years in radio, because it was a small station, and I had opportunities to move to other communities, but I had started a family in Red Deer. We were married in 1963 and started having kids, and we had a home. So I didn't really want to move. So I stuck with radio. I moved around. I was an announcer. I was a salesperson. I was a technician. And then we got involved with the TV station, and I ended up, my final job in business was in sales. But I also did a kids' TV show for 5 years, a live TV show called Captain's Cabin. As we were discussing earlier, that's why I grew my beard, because I figured the ship's captain had to have a beard. And I found a captain's hat, and the show went on live. It was half an hour. I think it was every Thursday at 4:30. And we had cartoons, Sinbad the Sailor cartoons, and a puppet named Seymour the Sea Serpent. And we had a fan club of 2,500 kids, believe it or not, so we'd give away prizes. And so that was sort of a highlight. And then the other highlights of my career in radio and television were, number one, the people I worked with, great people. You didn't get paid a lot, but I really enjoyed the work and enjoyed the people and enjoyed the things that we got involved in the community. And there were a lot of things. Every major event, the radio station was there, of course, promoting it, whether it was at the Westerner or was with some of the major sport organizations that would hold tournaments. I remember going out to the Lacombe Lions Ball Tournament every year, which is a big tournament, one of the biggest in Western Canada, and broadcasting out there, just getting involved in community activities, sort of stood me in good stead in later life when I became involved in recreation and culture, because I made a lot of connections within the community. So I really enjoyed the career. As I say, you didn't make a lot of money, and one of the reasons I finally decided to leave wasn't really any pension plan, and when you have a growing family, you need to look after them and have some security for the future. So that's why I left radio and television and was fortunate enough to join the City of Red Deer Recreation Department.
The Recreation Department, actually, the precursor of it was called the Athletic Association. And when Dad came back from the war, he realized that now that he had a family that was growing up, that a little more attention needed to be focused in this small town. I think when we were born, it was about 2,500. But the focus needed to be on the youth, because there were going to be a lot more young kids coming along because of the baby boom. So he and Alex Sim started the Athletic Association in 1947, and they voluntarily did a lot of work to get it started. In fact, I can remember there was no gym. So my father drilled a hole in one of the joists in the basement and hung a a duffel bag full of sawdust
for a boxing bag.
So our Hart could start, his boxing lessons, and that family went on to quite a significant boxing history. But that's how it got started, and eventually they hired the first recreation director, Jarvis Miller.
Yeah.
You can, if you carry on from there, because it certainly was a foresight perhaps on Dad's part, but certainly perfect timing because Red Deer needed it.
Yeah, when I joined the department in 1981, Don Moore was at that time called the recreation superintendent. We had in the department, the recreation department and the parks department were two separate departments. They later joined. And the culture, there wasn't a department, there was a cultural section within the recreation department. So there was community programs, there was athletics, which I was involved in, and there was the cultural and then aquatics. So there were maybe 10 of us that were involved in the programming. But over the years, of course, as the city grew, the department grew and the facilities grew. When I came to Red Deer, there was, and started with the department, there was one indoor swimming pool, which was the downtown one. In the early 1990s, I believe it was, the outdoor pool was built. And one of the first things they hosted was the Canadian National Diving Championships. And there were a couple of local divers that were involved in that. Mm-hmm. And of course, back then, it's the same thing. I think there was the downtown arena in the 50s, 60s, and into the 70s probably was the only arena until they started building some of the new arenas, the Kinsman Community Arenas, Kinex, which of course was one time in the winter. In the summer, it was a barn for the Western. In the winter, it was an arena. And over the years, as the need grew, so did the facilities. And of course, one of the first ones that was built that was sort of outside of the ordinary was the Daw Center. And that was unique in the province in that there were the two school districts involved in the city. So we had St. Pat's School and the Daw School, and then the Daw Center in between had the arena and the swimming pool and the library and some meeting rooms and a little fitness center. And it was unique in that the schools used the recreation facilities during the day, and the community was able to use the schools for community programs at night. So it was sort of a joint effort.
It was certainly foresight on Harold Daw's part, and now they're expanding it again.
They're expanding. There's another ice surface coming in, a larger fitness center, an outdoor spray park, and some other amenities that were needed on the north side of the city, and will enhance the facilities up there as well as for the rest of the city. And of course, now we have, I think it's 5 pools, indoor pools, 8 indoor arenas, seating anywhere from 200 to 7,000 when you think of the Centrium, and a lot of other facilities. Because over the years, when I was young, you played ball in the summer, you played football in the fall, and you played hockey in the winter. And basically, that was the way in most communities. And then as communities grew, there were some emerging sports that came about. You started getting things like lacrosse and ball hockey, soccer. When I started in the department, my kids were some of the first that started playing soccer, and I think there were 50 soccer players in Red Deer. Now there's well over 2,000. Mm-hmm. So some of these emerging sports, of course, needed some more facilities. And so they became more what we call Class A ball fields. Great Chief Park was built, and even a little controversy over the name, you may remember, but it's sort of the jewel of the softball, baseball, football. And then the Cullicut Center came about in the early 90s, I believe about 1991. No, sorry, it was after that. Forget exactly the year, but the Cullicut Center was built. About that time, there were a number of communities that were starting to build what they called multi-sport complexes. And the Cullicut Center was one of the first built in Red Deer. housing, of course, indoor soccer, the fitness center, the arena, indoor soccer fields, meeting rooms, and really served a need in terms of developing some of the facilities that were needed for some of these new sports.
Well, Red Deer has certainly grown, and it's fabulous to see how much the recreation department has expanded and grown itself. I won't get into the controversy about Great Chief Park, but I will mention the great chief was Chief Maskapatoon from Wetaskiwin, or the Peace Hills as they were known.
Yeah.
And the chap who wrote the book on him was our neighbor, chap better known as Kerry Wood.
Oh, yes.
So
absolutely.
I have some softness for that title, or at least one that would favor it. The other is, of course, I hope in our interview series that we will be able to include Don Moore, who's had such a demonstrable effect on Red Deer, particularly in orchestrating the establishment of the park system for Red Deer. But Jerry, do you want to comment, if you would, on some of the major events that, because we've had these facilities, Red Deer has hosted, and some of the people who've gone on to significant sporting successes because we've had the facilities on which they could train.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess backing up a bit in terms of the development of facilities, of course, one move that happened was in about 1981-82, the Exhibition Association, the grounds that were downtown, moved to the South Hill. And moved to South Red Deer, and at the same time the Centrium was being built, and so once the facilities were out there and the Centrium was built, completed in 1991, the Rebels started playing in 1992, and then of course over the years they've added more and more to that facility. The Prairie Pavilion, the Parkland Pavilion, and a number of other buildings, so that now it's probably the largest complex of its kind under one roof in Western Canada, and it's meant a lot to the community in terms of some of the sporting and community and cultural events that can be held there. But in terms of some of the major events, of course, because of the Centrium, Red Deer was able to host the World Junior Hockey Championships around 94, 95, followed by the Brier, followed by Sport Canada. And that sort of put Red Deer on the map. We'd hosted the Alberta Summer and Winter Games. In fact, when I was first in radio, in 1975, Red Deer hosted the Alberta Summer Games, which is one of the first summer games held. And then in 77, because no other community stepped forward, Red Deer hosted it again. And I was involved in both of those, in one as the first one as the chairman of the hospitality committee, and the second one as director of sport.
You do a great job at that.
and that got me involved in a number of other things as well. But the facilities that we have, of course, have enabled us to hold major events, not only multi-sport events, like the Alberta Games, the Canada Winter Games, of course, which we just held a few years ago, and which also helped to develop some additional sporting facilities, upgrades at Great Chief Park, at the new speed skating oval, upgrades out at River Bend with the cross-country and biathlon trails.
And now we have a new sports facility at Red Deer College.
And of course, the Red Deer College. Yeah, I was going to mention that as well. With the advent of the college and some of the facilities there, and now with the new Gary W. Harris Center, there's even more opportunities, and it's a great center, and it's used for the community. I go and watch my grandkids play hockey. They're just about every weekend. I have 4 grandkids in hockey, so spend a lot of time in hockey arenas. But Red Deer has become known as an area and a community that has the facilities and the volunteers to run these major events. And not only, as I say, the multi events, but something like the Canadian Pickleball Championships were just held with the new pickleball Who would have thought a few years ago pickleball would be such a big sport? But we have that marvelous facility up in the northeast corner of the city there, and it held the championships. We've held the Riggers, have held national baseball championships. We've held provincial and Western Canadian and national championships in a number of other sports as well. So Red Deer has done well. And now, after the Canada Games, there's an organization that has been put together with some funding from that will be promoting Red Deer along with Tourism Red Deer as a major sporting and event and cultural center in Alberta and in Canada. So
we've sure come a long
way.
We
have come a long way.
Yeah. Are there some individuals that have, I guess in the sporting and there have gone on to exceptional careers, starting in Red Deer or Central Alberta?
There have. There are a number that have graduated from ones like the old Red Deer Rustlers, and recently the Rebels, and in the recent years, and of course gone on to the NHL and have played in the NHL. And then we've had a number of athletes in figure skating. You think of Jamie Soleil, a number in speed skating, the Weatherspoon family. So yeah, there have been a lot of athletes that have become well known. There's also a number of individuals from Red Deer who have made their mark in the cultural and in the performing arts and in movies and in people have gone to Red Deer College, not necessarily from the city, but from the Central Alberta area, who've gone on to great things in television and movies, in the cultural and fine and performing arts.
That's certainly been a very significant part of the college's program. I think of, it's sad that he's not with us, but Keith Mann, who became internationally known for the Red Deer Royals and the band groups that he put together, who won awards around the world.
The Royals have been real ambassadors for the city, and they've traveled the world. They've done really well. They've won numerous awards and prizes, and so it's just one of the many facets of the city in recreation, cultural, and then of course our park system. The Boston Park system and all the trails. We're known for our trails and for our facilities in that respect, and for our trees. I've had friends and family come from other parts of Alberta and the States and Canada, never been to Red Deer, and I tour them around the city and they're just amazed. Number one, at our facilities, our cultural facilities, our sporting facilities, but also about the number of trees. They said, some of them said, oh yeah, we've driven past Red Deer, never been in. And they're just amazed at how much parkland we have and how many trees and things like the Kerrywood Nature Center and Bower Ponds and Waskesiu Park System and Heritage Ranch, all those things that make Red Deer such a great place.
And when I was growing up, the draw was the sanctuary. And I can remember my father talking about the controversy over what should be a sanctuary, because he said Kerrywood wanted the whole city to be one. I didn't think we could handle that. But we certainly could handle one, which is part of Gates Lake and so on.
Yeah, you and I are both old enough. We know where the original entry to the sanctuary was, at the bottom of the what some people call Missionary Hill, or others call the 55th Street Hill, but. It's a far cry now from what it was back then, and it's another one of the jewels in Red Deer in terms of facilities.
Your tree comments remind me that in the early years, back in the 10s and 20s, Red Deer almost went bankrupt in the early 20s, and then the mini depression that occurred then. So it had no debt and wanted no debt, but what it did afford, and the only thing it did afford, was not paved roads. They came later. But 55th Street was tree lined with spruce trees, and 45th Avenue was tree lined with spruce trees.
And Spruce Drive,
They were hallmarks of the city, and it was really sad to see them come down years later. Jerry, are there any comments, any larger comments you want to make about recreation and culture? in the city as it grew, or we've talked a bit about some of the recreational facilities that you've summarized and more particularly importantly been a part of, and particularly a part of sharing those with other parts of Canada by holding major events here. And that's done a lot to establish Red Deer's reputation. We don't have, like most communities, some really significant people other than perhaps Roland Mitchener in the earlier years. As I've always said, Red Deer's history is in its future, and we certainly have an exciting future because it's young and youthful and vibrant and active and has vision and has been able to accomplish a lot of things and has had a very supportive community. And it's not just in recreation. I'm doing some work on some of the educational history in Red Deer. It applies there too. It's a significant part of Alberta, not just the stopping place between
Calgary and Edmonton,
where you gas up and go.
You don't even come into Red Deer.
That's unfortunately true.
Yeah, no, I think the credit is due to the many people over the years in city councils and recreation boards and other groups and organizations that had the foresight to see the future and to recognize that the future lies in developing amenities that will really benefit the citizens of the city of Red Deer, as well as those in central Alberta and the wider provincial and national community, and keeping facilities, building new facilities, but also making sure that current facilities are kept up to date, whether it's sporting facilities or some of the cultural facilities. I mean, we look at the Memorial Center, which at one time was part of the old Army camp and has been around for years and years, but is still a facility that is well used and well kept up. So there's lots of credit to a lot of people who have taken the time and effort to really plan out the city and plan for the future.
Yeah, and that's actually not been easy to happen, to put together. I think of my father's comment at the time the United Way was starting in the 1950s, and how difficult it was because Red Deer had such a high turnover of good people, in the banking industry or, with the RCMP and the government. He stayed 2 years, certainly at the most 4 years, and the good people left.
Yeah.
And now it was therefore very difficult to get continuity and get some of these volunteer programs started and continued. But you've certainly been involved in, for many, many years, in a number of them. And perhaps you tell us a bit about some of the volunteer work that you've done, not only while you were with the recreation people, department, but afterwards, now that you're a little more available because you're like me, you're retired.
Well, I've mentioned scouting. I started in scouting as an 11-year-old in Stettler, went up to the rank of Queen Scout, which is the highest you get there. As I told my story of how I got involved here in Red Deer through my uncle and stayed involved, and actually up until a few years ago, I'd been involved, so over 60 years that I've been involved in scouting. I was a regional commissioner, a district commissioner, a provincial deputy commissioner, worked on several scouting jamborees, and I learned a lot. Scouting was one of the things that taught me a lot about dealing with people, working with people, being self-sufficient. Of course, the program has changed over the years, and one of the sad things is that it's no longer as relevant as it once was. You don't get the numbers. My son is still a Cub leader and Scout leader. 3 of my grandkids are involved. But I had a lot of great times and learned a lot through scouting and met a lot of wonderful people. And a few characters like Denny May, who was Wap May's son, who was involved he was on staff. One of the great ones is Ernie Kuhn, who you would have known. And Ernie was the provincial, he was the staff sergeant in charge of the Red Deer RCMP at the time. That was the highest rank in Red Deer. And he was also went up to the ranks in scouting, was the provincial commissioner. And one story, I remember, I forget where we were going. I was going with Ernie. I was the regional commissioner. He was the provincial commissioner. Of course, he lived in Red Deer. We were headed somewhere. And Ernie had his, it was a police car, but it was a ghost car, didn't have any markings. And we were roaring down the highway probably 20 to 30 miles an hour over the speed limit because we were late, and we get pulled over by the RCMP. And the officer came up, took one look, and Ernie pulled out his ID and showed it to him. "Oh, thank you, Staff Coombs. Have a good night. Be on your way." So he could pretty well do anything you wanted, but Ernie was a great, wonderful person. And you mentioned Roland Michener, who, of course, as Governor General, was also the Chief Scout of Canada. And he came to Red Deer shortly after his inauguration as Governor General, and I met him because I was involved in scouting at the time at the provincial level and had written him a congratulatory letter on behalf of the province, and met him at the reception at the Galbraith's house down in the Woodley area. And then a few years later, he came back through by train, and his train was parked at the CPR station. And the scout shop where we had our headquarters was just across the street there on 48th Avenue, or 48th Street. And one of our fellows there was quite bold. His name was Tom Hart. He went across to the train and talked to the aide de camp and said, "Oh, the scout headquarters is just over here. Would the Governor General like to come and visit?" And he said, "Well, I'll talk to him." So we went back, and an hour or two later, we were having a meeting. In the door walks the Governor General. And he came in, he talked to us. We had pictures taken with him. A wonderful man. And one of the moments I'll treasure in my years in the scouting movement.
One of the bronzes that we're missing right in Red Deer is the bronze of Roland Michener running the trails.
Yeah.
Because he was such a great tennis player, trail runner, and outdoors person.
And then in terms of other involvements, I've been involved in numerous community organizations, some more than others, with the Heart and Stroke Foundation, which I know is near and dear to your heart, and with 25 years as a director and as the president of the Alberta Foundation for 3 years. Special Olympics has sort of been my go-to activity before retirement. I'm starting my 41st year with Special Olympics in Red Deer, and I'm also on the provincial board. But I started as part of my job with the city. I was a liaison with a number of sporting groups, and one of them was Special Olympics, and I sort of became enamored of the program and the goals and objectives of providing sport opportunities for individuals with an intellectual disability. And I've stayed involved ever since, and I took advantage of my offices with the city park and recreation department to use my office and my computer and my secretary to do a lot of that work. And then when I retired in 2006, we opened a little office down here where we are today. And so I spend a number of hours a day here doing as a volunteer for Special Olympics Red Deer. And the program has grown tremendously over the years, both locally and provincially. And it's something that's near and dear to my heart, and I'll probably continue as long as I can.
It's kind of them to offer their facilities to us for this interview today. I can't resist when you raise the topic of scouting in Red Deer to think of a few stories which Michael Dawes certainly complimented. Yes, I was in scouting along with my brother, and I well remember Ernie Coombs. He was the assistant scoutmaster on our trip to the first World Jamboree outside North America. It was held in Niagara-on-the-Lake.
Oh, yeah.
And I can still remember some of the ditties that he taught us. he was a very unique character. But scouting in Red Deer started with some soldiers who'd come back from the Boer War and had been under General Baden-Powell,
Lord Baden-Powell,
who was the senior British officer after the war, and under him were the Lord Strathcona Horse, which gave him contacts with Central Alberta. So he wrote one of them to see if they would start a scouting troop in Red Deer, and there's still an argument about where the first one in Alberta was, a Calgary or Red Deer, but I think Michael would say it was in Red Deer. But the really significant story I wanted to add was about 1911. There was a lumberman from Saskatchewan who didn't have much more to do. In fact, didn't have a job. Came to Red Deer and managed to pull a revolver, I think, on the chief of police. So the of all people to go look for the guy, they recruited the scout troop. And two scouts, Chadsey and Phil Galbraith, found him sleeping behind a little mound in where the Westerner now is. The mayor of the city, Mayor Welliver, very kindly and appreciatively raised $500 to send the two of them to the Jamboree in London, England. Yeah. And when Lord Baden-Powell came to tour the Jamboree in preparation for the march down to the coronation, he stopped at the Canadian contingent. He got off his horse and he pulled two medals out of his backpack, his horseback, and he said, "Would the two scouts from Red Deer please come forward?" And he pinned these medals on him, the highest award that scouting offered at that time. So those are a couple of the highlights in the early years. There was a Cubmaster by the name of H.E. Callender who ran the Cubs for, 40 or 50 years. And Baden-Powell, every time he came to Alberta, wanted to stop in Red Deer because his favorite walking stick was a diamond willow. Yeah. And every time he came, he got another diamond willow stick. The scout leader in the 30s was Kerry Wood. Yeah. And it disbanded during the war, but my father and mother restarted it after the war. And I have many remarkable experiences that followed from that time when Dad was the scoutmaster, rebuilding or building some of the youthful organizations that the community needed. Yeah. But those are very fond memories. And like you, I was a Queen Scout. And I had my B cords, and I remember proudly going and marching in the Red Deer Parade, trying to show them off.
And of course, one of the things that happened in Red Deer was the building of the log cabin, which is now back in the use. I think about 1936 was dedicated by, I think it was Lord Tweedsmuir.
That would fit.
He was the Governor General at that time, and of course it served the community well for many years. We used to sell Christmas trees out of there and had other activities. And unfortunately, it's I wouldn't say it's fallen in hard times. I think it's still in fairly good shape, but now it's looking at having to be moved, or hopefully not dismantled because of the sale of that portion of the land. But one other little story I'll relate in terms of my time in scouting. In 1958. I was at a provincial jamboree at Hillsdown Flats, just between Banff and Lake Louise. There's a big area. There was about, I think, 1,800 of us there from Alberta at the jamboree. I was one of the older scouts at 16. And one night, late evening, we were called, all the older scouts, to get together. And we had found out that there was a young 4-year-old girl lost on the mountain, and it was the big mountain there that they renamed Mount Eisenhower. I think was Castle Mountain.
Castle Mountain.
Yeah, and
by James Hector.
Yeah, and so they must have been 50 or 60 of us, and we found out along that mountain and on both sides of the road, and we walked through sloughs up to our waist in water, trying to find a body, unfortunately, with our feet, and up the mountainside. And we were there all night in the rain. And we were walking in a line across the mountain, and we came to a waterfall. We couldn't cross it, so they called us off. The happy ending is the next morning, some of the park rangers found her sound asleep. She'd climbed 1,000 feet up the mountainside. And what had happened, she'd gone to a washroom with her sisters, and when she came out, they weren't there, and she took the wrong turn and went up the mountain. But the end of the story is, about 30 years ago, I was at the 40th wedding anniversary of some friends from our church, and their daughter was there, and she was talking to another gentleman and telling her all about the time she was lost in the mountain in Banff. And I went over and sat down and I said, oh, and here's the rest of the story. I was one of those poor guys lost through the rain looking for you. And we've been family friends ever since. So there are all those kinds of stories that come about when you least expect it.
Well, that in some ways brings us, I guess, current with some of our own experiences that we've been able to share in this interview. It's certainly been fun, not only going over them again, but sharing them and then to discover how interrelated, perhaps from different generations, but how interrelated our own experiences here in Red Deer have been, and how Red Deer has provided those opportunities. I know that when I was growing up, either for discipline reasons or because parents had the resources and thought that an education elsewhere was better, the youth in Red Deer didn't always stay in Red Deer. They could be sent elsewhere on the basis that it was, quote, better. But as I look back on it, the experience of growing up and living in Red Deer has been remarkable. And it's certainly, if you look at the population size, the people who come to Red Deer, so many people say the same thing.
Yeah.
It just has a spirit, a community spirit that few have. And that continues, particularly supported, encouraged by people like yourself, Jerry. And so it's been a real pleasure to go over some of those stories, see where they match and mix. And
the story hasn't ended. It continues.
Well, let's hope it does for a little while for both of us. Anyway, I sure appreciate it. Thank you for sharing the time with us, Jerry. It's been illustrative and it's been fun. And let's hope that we can find more citizens in Red Deer who have a similar experience and attitude and in Red Deer and reflect on how it's grown over time, but it's certainly a very significant city, and not just in Alberta, but increasingly in Canada. Yeah. Whether it's the Ron McLeans that come from Red Deer, who they are.
I worked with Ron. Actually, I sort of gave him his first job in radio when he started. And yeah, Ron's been a great ambassador for Red Deer. And we have a lot of great ambassadors, maybe not as well known as Ron, but people that have grown up in Red Deer, made their mark on the world in other areas, whether it's medicine or whether it's sports or culture. And as I say, there's still lots of the story left to be told. I think there's a lot of up-and-coming people and new people that are making their mark in the community.
Well, we'll have to raise that concept with Michael Daw and get him to talk about the Hall of Fame at Lindsay Thurber. The increasingly lengthy Hall of Fame of some very significant people already there, especially if you look at their backgrounds.
Yeah,